Before we begin, I really want to take a moment to acknowledge that wherever you are zooming in from, you are on Indigenous land. And MOHAI itself is on the land, particularly of the Coast Salish people, the Duwamish, Suquamish, and all Coast Salish people. And at MOHAI, we think it's very important to acknowledge the forced displacement of people, the Duwamish people, while also honoring the endurance of those who still live here. To this day, the Duwamish have yet to receive federal recognition, and we encourage you to learn more about their struggle for federal recognition as well as the tribe by visiting right now online the Duwamish Longhouse and Cultural Center, and when things reopen, to go in person to learn more. We also want to note that this program is taking place during a year of unprecedented protests against police violence towards Black people. These protests in our community and across the nation are a call to action for each of us to state unequivocally that Black lives matter. And MOHAI stands firmly on the side of inclusion, empathy, and cultural equity. So thank you for holding that as we move into this program where we'll be talking about all the complexities that history raises. So with that, I'm going to let Jennifer Ott take it away and introduce our speaker for the evening.
Thanks so much. Thank you for those statements. It's now the trick is putting them into action. And so my name is Jennifer Ott. I'm the Assistant Director at HistoryLink, and I'm thrilled to be here today with my friend, Tamiko Nimura. And let's see, she'll come on here live here pretty soon. And I wanted to introduce her as first my friend, and then also as a freelance writer from Tacoma. She's the author of a recent publication, Rosa Franklin, A Life in Healthcare, Public Service, and Social Justice. And she is the co-author of the graphic novel, We Hereby Refuse, Japanese American Resistance to Wartime Incarceration, that will be coming out early next year. And I am waiting with bated breath to read that. And she also contributes regularly to HistoryLink, Discovery Nikkei, and the International Examiner. And she writes in a number of different venues and styles. And so I enjoy always seeing what she has to say about different topics. And so I will bring Tamiko on with her screen, and we are I'm going to have her do an introduction to her topic, and then we will get started with a conversation. Welcome to Tamiko. Maybe. Let's see, I wonder if we're having technical difficulties. Nope, there we go. We've got sound and we've got video. Yay, there she is.
Yes, I should be here, right?
You're here. Welcome.
Great. Thank you. Oh, Jen, it's so great to do this with you. I so appreciate the invitation to do this.
Yeah, thank you. So if you want to start with your introduction, I think that Rachel and Nicole will start the PowerPoint presentation, or is this where you'd like to start with this slide?
You can keep it here for now, and then I'll ask them to advance in just a second.
Great, sounds good.
Great. So hi, everybody. My name is Tamiko Nimura. I am half Japanese American, half Filipina American. I like to say this half is Japanese American and this half is Filipina American. I am a writer and I live here in Tacoma. I've been here since 2004. And before that, I was in Seattle from 1998 to 2004 at the UW. Let's see, I'm here in Tacoma and I've been writing public history for about 5 to 6 years. And I've been writing in a bunch of different genres. The topic we chose for tonight was writing in remembrance. And I think that's really perfect because it goes along with so many of my interests. I write historical, I write memoir, I write biography, I write arts coverage. All kinds of things, but they always go back to the personal, the historical, and really the arts. So I'm really thrilled to be here. The way we talked about doing tonight was I didn't want to have a talking head the whole time. And so what we thought we'd do was I'll show a slide with a few images, talk about what those images are mean for me, and they're things that I've worked on or are meaningful for me. And after that, Jen has some questions for me to answer. And then we'll just have basically 3 of those slides and images, hoping that people will have questions about the projects that I've worked on or the things that we've covered in our discussion. So this first image, I saw somebody type in Rosa Franklin very excitedly. So yes, this is me on the left and Senator Rosa Franklin on the right. And I'll talk more about that image in just a few minutes. So we could go to the first slide then. Okay, great. All right. Writing in Remembrance, it goes back really for me to college. This is Wheeler Hall at UC Berkeley. It's the home of the English department on the left there. And I think where my interests in writing history really came back here. I was an English major. I have degrees in English and my PhD is in English. So you might wonder where the history part came in, and it came in here. In my senior year at Berkeley, I was writing my honors thesis. I was really stubborn and I wanted to write about authors that nobody was going to be covering in my English department classes. And these were 3rd generation Japanese American women writers who were like me and had some experience of the wartime incarceration with their families, and they would write about it. So I was writing along, doing my thesis, and I came across this huge problem, and I climbed the stairs there at Wheeler, all 4 flights to get to the top where my advisor's office was. And I walked in and I sat down and I said, I have this big problem. And he said, what is it? And he knew that I'd been writing about these topics, these authors, Janice Minikitani and Ruth Sasaki. And he said, what's your problem? And I said, I have to include some history. And I was, and now that I think back on it, I realized that this was a really crazy problem to have for an English major. That I've been trained, right, to be writing sort of strictly about the text, right, just the text, ma'am, and not to include outside context, not to include the context of production, all these things that I had thought I was very comfortable doing. And my professor looked very calmly back at me and he said, you are right. You will have to include some history. I was writing about silence and about memory and generations of silence about the wartime incarceration. And without that context of the incarceration, my thesis did not make any sense. It would not be legible. So my professor said, you are absolutely right. You have to include some history. But I'll never forget what he said next. What he said next was, now, not everybody in this department would let you do it. And I was shocked, just shocked. I'd gone to Berkeley, right, because it was this revolutionary place. There were recycle or die signs outside the student union. And I could not believe that I was in a department that would actually think about not letting me include this history in this thesis topic. So from there, I knew that I wanted to study the literature of people of color. I also became interested in historiography, right? Who gets to write history and how, and what kinds of power dynamics are involved in that. And so really, I went on to study African-American studies and African-American literature in grad school, which gave me a really good foundation and context, not only for race in the United States, but also for working with those contexts intertwined, the historical, the literary, and so on. And really to think about those power dynamics and the archives and what kinds of silences there might be in different kinds of archives. So all the way from there, I came to history a couple of decades later. Those are the text that I wrote about. This is the department. Jen has some questions for me about this sort of first stage of of where I got to writing.
I do. And I'm not actually familiar with either of these books, so I will be getting the titles from you afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
Because one of the things I'm curious about is how your literary background I'm sorry, first I should ask you, how did you come to write biographies?
Yeah.
Because are either of these biographies, or are they?
They're not. They're fiction.
Yeah.
So there's poetry at the top. That's Janice Minikitani. Poetry, and then some prose, like essays.
Mm-hmm.
And then the bottom is short stories by Ruth Sasaki,
Ooh.
who I got to meet, and she's incredible. They're both incredible. They hold up, I think. Minikitani was married to oh my goodness, Cecil Moore, I want to say his name is, at Glide Memorial Church in San Francisco. So this really big activist church and tradition. Yeah. So how biography?
Yeah, how'd you get to biography?
Unlike you, I don't read biography very much. So when I got to write one, I do read a lot of memoir. I do read a lot of some autobiography. So I wasn't completely out of the genre, but yes. So how I came to write biography, partly it was HistoryLink. Justin Wadlin, who's a librarian at UW Tacoma, invited me to come to a HistoryLink writers meeting for Pierce County, where you were, and really encouraged me, mentored me a bit with the research process, because it was kind of new to me. Michael Sullivan, of course, is another wonderful, now dear friend and public historian, who taught me a lot about really what it is to bring a passion to the story, right? He, taught me about things like the Polk directories, and just both of them taught me about the different kinds of sources that you use when you do biography. It really is a sort of whole package kind of conversation. But I had a PhD, so I at least knew how to do research, and I knew how to go down the rabbit holes and be okay with that for a while.
Right.
So that's the biography piece. Senator Franklin's biography is a really funny story. I don't know if we have a ton of time for it, but the short story behind Senator Franklin's biography is that she asked me to write it. It's a biography and an oral history. I don't know if you can see me, right?
Yes, if you put it right by your shoulder, we can see it. There you go. Yeah.
So yes, it's so I was giving a talk. Senator Franklin heard me talk about my work on the history of Tacoma's Japantown, and she, I think, liked what she heard, and so she asked me for my resume after the talk was over. I didn't know why she asked me, but she did. And then after some conversations, I realized that she was, in this roundabout way, asking me to be her biographer. And I was shocked. Like, this will be my first book, you realize? I haven't done a long biography before. And she was like, that's okay. She saw my resume and she liked what she saw. She forwarded it to folks down at the legislature and the Secretary of the Senate. And so I got approved and vetted that way. So big learning curve, but I really am honored by her trust in me.
Yeah, it's interesting how public history in particular is so well suited to that interdisciplinary background.
Yes, I hope so.
Yeah, I think I know that when I left grad school, it was a little bit of telling myself that I look like a historian, I can be a historian too, or this is what a historian looks like, even though I had a degree in history. But I was lucky because my advisor had done kind of what Michael did for you, where that bringing in the stories and just really that enthusiasm for the human side of the story that we can all connect to.
Yes.
That I think that grounded me well. And it sounds like it did you too, with how to get in and help people hear the significance of individual lives.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so now I'll ask my second question. How has your lit background influenced your research and writing, or vice versa?
Yeah, I think it really does come down to the love of a good story, right? And the love of, I have a good question, and English majors are good at the significance of a detail, right? That is part of our main training, and that can translate nicely into public history, right?
Mhm.
You know, look at this wooden sign. Well, it's a wooden sign, but when you realize that the wooden sign was made in camp and that it was preserved for decades after that, then people, right, start to think about that long textured life that the object might have had, right? So I think it's the love of a good story
And
that
that
comes
curiosity,
through.
right? Every time I talk
Yes.
with you, I'm struck by your curiosity and sort of engagement with what does that mean kind of thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and speaking of sources, what are your favorite sources?
Yes, so I brought up the wooden sign because I am, I was thinking about it as I was preparing for today, and my favorite sources really are the ones that have been in people's houses, basements, attics, right, garages, photos, heirlooms, papers. The wooden sign that I just thought about is one that I came across when I was doing some work on Vashon Island. For working on Japanese American farms and farmers there. And there was one farmer who brought out this wooden sign that the original Japanese American farmer had made. And I believe that he'd made it in camp. And the reason the reason I think this is that I saw it in one of those like Leaving History videos, right? There's a picture of the Fujioka family. There's a picture of the sign in there next to their barrack in camp.
Oh,
And
wow.
right.
Huh.
And I just thought it was great, you know, great object. It was really cool. It was handmade, but I didn't realize until later, right, that that was the history behind it. So the things that people aren't really, either they treasure it because they know it's historical, right, but might not have a larger context for it,
Right.
or the kinds that they aren't sure are important, right? Senator Franklin's button collection was epic. I have
Like
pictures of it.
campaign buttons, that sort of
Yes.
thing. Oh, cool.
Yeah, like her, I mean, she just brought me a few, right? When we were doing our interviews together, our oral history interviews, she just brought me a few to look at. And I was like, wow, these are so interesting. There was one for the Alice Hamilton Clinic, which was a women's health clinic in Tacoma, short-lived during the 70s. And so I went down that rabbit hole. But then I went to her house and I saw she had like banners upon banners of the political buttons.
We don't make enough buttons these days. I'm afraid
I
that sort of
know,
way
not
of
as
leaving those
much.
signposts of our stories is going to be kind of lost. Jeanette
Yeah.
Williams in the Seattle City Council, in the city archives, there are boxes of her buttons also. And
Oh, wow.
after going through them, my perspective on her life was just shifted, kind of broadened,
Yes.
because I just hadn't thought of her in confluence with some of the things that I found in her collection. It was like, how interesting that you went to that, you saved that button, and it had some meaning to you.
Yeah, exactly.
So cool. Okay, so we go on to the second set of
Yeah,
images.
we'll do the second slide. So, oops, that's the third slide. There's the second slide. Okay, so the second slide here, these all represent projects that I've worked on. And I think what ties them together is that they are largely unsung or lesser sung people who have paved the way, right? So on the left there, right, is me with Senator Franklin. For folks who don't know, she was the first Black woman to be elected to the Washington State Senate. She had this incredible 43-year career in healthcare, all kinds of healthcare. She was a cadet nurse at the end of World War II, lived in Germany for a while, and ended up in Tacoma, and went from her healthcare career, then went to the Washington State Legislature for 20 years. 20 years.
Yeah, it's just,
right?
I'm still kind of taken back by that. I've read your book and I'm still just amazed by her life. Yeah.
Just think about all the different governors she served under, and she's still alive, still with us today. And to walk with her on her rich life journey from, 7 or 8 right, onwards, was an incredible privilege that I am honestly still learning from. People, like ask me, so what did you learn about working on the Senator Franklin project? And I just keep telling them, I'm going to be unpacking that project forever, honestly. Partly because, she's had such an amazing span of things that she has gone through, right? We talked about when she heard about the news about Brown versus Board, about buying a house in Tacoma in the 1950s, about the women's movement and people of color in healthcare in Washington State and in Tacoma in the 70s, all the way through to her career in the first in the House and then in the Senate. After that, she's just, and then the advent of cell phones and computers. And it's just, it was a really incredible journey. And she's such a lovely person, so warm and so giving. I felt like I was learning not only about the historical lessons, but also these life lessons about what it is to be a public servant, what it is to be a lifelong student and a lifelong teacher. And so I'm happy to answer certainly questions about that as well. So the book, which I can bring up again, the book is about half biography of Senator Franklin and about half oral history, and the transcripts of our conversations. One of the funny things about the transcripts is that we laughed a lot. So you'll see, if you actually read the transcripts, you see this laughter. And that's partly because of who she is. She's just a lovely person and really funny.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah. Did you get to meet her that night at the book
No,
signing
she was
event?
loved by her
Oh my
admirer,
gosh.
but I got to enjoy
Yes.
just kind of the energy in the room. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had two parties for her, two book parties for her at the beginning of the year, pre-COVID. So the picture on the left there is from her book signing at the Capitol, which was really amazing. And they sat her down at the rostrum of the Senate, where she got to kind of sit in the seat of honor, and they all got to stand and recognize her and give her a standing ovation. The second party was at the Asia Pacific Cultural Center.
That's the one I got to go to. Yeah.
Yeah, that's when you got to go to.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see, top right of the screen. This is Heisuke and Yoneichi Matsuda from Vashon Island. And this is part of a project that I got to do about Japanese American farms and farming on Vashon Island. That island will never look the same to me again. Michael asked me, and then I in turn asked my friend Vince Spiteweiler to do some work with the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation. And we did basically a driving tour that you can take. Yes, thank you, Nicole. She just put up the link to the tour where we had different farms and different sites that were relevant for Japanese American history on Vashon Island. Heisuke and Yoneichi were strawberry farmers on Vashon Island. As it turns out, their family is a friend of my family in that small Japanese American world. Yoneichi's sister, Mary, who's known as Mary Matsuda Grunwald, is a family friend of my uncle and aunties. And that particular project, we got to drive around Vashon Island with Bruce Hallman, who's one of their resident historians there. We got to talk to farmers. We got to correspond with descendants of the Japanese American farmers there. It was a really large and wonderful project. I really felt very connected to those folks. So that's another large public history project that I got to do. And again, it was about, telling the stories, right? We also worked with the Friends of MOHAI and the MOHAI House, and got to see what they're doing with Japanese American history on Vashon, which is a really wonderful project to see. The bottom right image there is an image from the most recent biography that I did for HistoryLink. The young man standing on the left-hand side is Bob Mizukami, who was the second mayor of Fife. He was also a 442nd veteran, one of the most decorated units in military history in the United States. He and his family were incarcerated during World War II. Bob Mizukami's son, Greg, is still with us and provided me with this really precious family photo. Greg actually is the little baby sitting there in the middle. The Mizukamis had 4 sons, and I believe all 4 of them went off to war and were part of the 442nd.
Wow.
So, right. And at least 3, if not 4. And I should remember this more clearly, but my brain is a little fuzzy these days about how many out of the 4. But a really fascinating story. Mizukami also lived a very long life and spoke out in different ways for Japanese American history and civil rights. So those are just 3 of the projects that I've been able to work on, and I've really loved doing all of them, really.
It makes you realize how many stories there are to tell.
Yes.
Because those are 3 very rich stories. And yeah, there's just so many things that we could talk about. So my background's environmental history. And
right.
so I'm always interested in how we understand place and all of that. So do you think that individual stories help us understand the history of place?
Yeah, absolutely. From Senator Franklin's story, right, I learned just what it was to, people think that, because Senator Franklin is African-American, that she would be all about right deeply in the civil rights history and activism of Tacoma. And she was, but really her lens, right, at least for quite some time, was about health, right? Healthcare, healthcare access, but also then as she began to serve in the legislature, and she served on one of the councils for President Clinton about how the environment, right, affects communities of color, right, and then and then health disparities among communities of color, and from all of that, right, I learned so much about our place just by sort of tracing her one story. She actually worked with Dr. George Tanbara, who I also wrote about for HistoryLink. He founded Pediatrics Northwest and was part of community healthcare in the founding. And Senator Franklin actually volunteered at what would become one of community healthcare clinics, at Lister Elementary School. And it was, again, all about who would see Black kids, right? Or who would see lower income kids. And I just could never think about Tacoma in the same way again after learning that. From Vashon Island, I learned that at one point you could see clear across the island, right? Because of the farming, right? And
yeah, the fields would have been cleared. Yeah.
Yeah, when you drive through it now, you would not get that sense at all, right? But we have pictures, right, of, okay, here's so-and-so's, strawberry farms and this acreage, and you can see clearly from, at least one side, right, to the other.
I find in Tacoma, particularly the cultural geography of housing history and religious history, immigrant history, just all of those things, you realize that you know the city the way you do because of how people have lived there and where they've lived. And it's such a basic idea, but it's also, until you understand, in my opinion, until you understand individual people's stories, I think it's really hard to get past kind of the platitudes and really understand the processes that get us where we are, because it's not usually a straight line. There's usually things. And when you did the work on the Nihamachi in Tacoma, and how you would have those the stair steps up to the houses that were no longer there, the Japantown, and especially as UW-Tacoma continues to thrive and grow, how do you keep that sort of history of place that is not necessarily visible is
Yes.
something as a historian I'm interested in, because just because it's not visible doesn't mean it doesn't affect us today.
Yes, right. And in fact, it's almost more so, right? That
Yes.
the lack of things there is often what gets people, right? One of the things that I do, as you know, with Michael is these walking tours of Tacoma's Japantown. And honestly, what we have are 2 buildings from that era left to show people. And then we have a memorial after that. And I heard from a friend who went on the tour with us that people were kind of whispering with each other. And one woman said, well, there's that, this is nice, but there's not that much to see. And I believe my friend actually went up to her and said, that's actually part of the point, is that there's not that much.
How did that happen?
Yeah, how did that happen? I know. I really hope that we get to preserve, as UW-Tacoma grows, I hope we get to preserve some of those stairs, right, that would have led up to houses, because there's something very powerful and poignant about those. There are lots of these stairs and then vacant lots around UW-Tacoma, particularly around the Tacoma Buddhist Temple.
Right. I remember when you wrote about the Buddhist temple, that from that article in particular, the sense of community that I could understand, that, the temple might be one of the last things standing, but once you kind of cite it in the stories of the people that have worshiped there, you get such a sense of the interconnectedness and the people, and, that it doesn't surprise me anymore that Robert Mizukami was the second mayor of Fife, right? Now I understand the sort of the lay of the land and who was where and what people were doing. So it's interesting how that, just by understanding the cultural and community events, that you can start to kind of understand the space also.
Yeah, definitely. And I am super concerned about the temple. I'm not a member of the temple, but I am super concerned about it because UW-Tacoma owns the land all around it. And if we're not careful, right, we could really lose a sense of what that history is right around the temple. And it's a really powerful part of our city's history.
Yeah, and that pressure for place, once development. The galloping development is so hard to negotiate with.
Yes.
So this is, I realize now as I'm asking it, an enormous question, but maybe you can pick a couple of things about what you've learned from writing memoirs and biographies.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe what's different than writing the other writing that you've done in your life.
Yeah, I think, well, for biography, I have this whole new respect for portrait painters, right? Folks who, spend a bunch of intimate time with a person, right? And then might often give that portrait, to the person, which can be quite terrifying, honestly. And I think what a great privilege it is to really, really listen to someone's life. Especially as I got to do with Senator Franklin. And then also to really chase down what I thought were the most important parts of her legacy. And I couldn't quite do it in the sort of space and time that I had. I'm sure lots of folks will be talking about her legacy for a long time, but I really tried to look at it in terms of not only her as a legislator, as a parent, as a mentor for other folks, just the really large, beautiful ways that we can have an impact on others' lives. And that, I think, will be an inspiration for sure. For memoir, I've been writing memoir for quite some time, lots of essays, and I'm working on a memoir length book of my own right now. And what I'm discovering is that the more I get to reflect and think about and quite literally write about my experience, the more sedimented it becomes and the richer it feels. And I'll revisit this episode that I hadn't thought about for some time or written about in some time and thought and go, oh, I didn't realize that layer of of insight and knowledge. So these are both questions like to be continued, right? Like I'll be
Exactly.
learning about these things forever, probably. But that's
A lifetime
kind
of work.
yeah, a lifetime of work.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I guess
So
that's the way of it.
I'll ask you one more before we go to the next slide is
Yeah.
what are the biggest obstacles to getting these stories of people of color published, not just written, but published?
Yes. Part of it, as I understand it, this is my perspective, is that they're, the gatekeepers for publishing are not always open to a variety of stories about people of color. They, they might say, oh, there's one, so we've got one for the year.
Check it out.
Check it off, right? That's one obstacle. I think another obstacle is that some people insist that the story be universal, like universally applicable or whatever. And by that, they often, but not always, they often mean a white story. So I think that's another obstacle. The third thing I want to say really is in terms of obstacles is that I think there need to be a lot more folks who are teaching and writing the histories of people of color, who are people of color. There's something very powerful, I think, about being able to write from that experience with an understanding of that experience and to really move into an experience that I think is just still underrepresented, right? There are organizations, meetings that I've gone into and been one of, if not the only, person of color. And that's still, I think we still need more representation in that arena. I should mention, so Senator Franklin is the first person of color featured in this Washington State Legislative Oral History Program. So in that series, and I believe that I am the first person of color historian also to be writing that. And this is 2020, right?
Mm-hmm.
Senator Franklin was not the first African American to be in the legislature. So it's, I think there's some soul searching to be done.
There's some room.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this as I was thinking about this conversation, that just what you're saying, that there's these big events in American history that a lot of us only know from our history class, or
Yes.
the one that pops into my mind is Brown v. Board in 1954, that Supreme Court case, which is taught as a big leap forward and as a resolution to a problem. But I think if more people of color were writing about that, and maybe they are, if I was seeing more of that as I was being educated, that so if it was more readily available, then I would understand that it was just a step and it was just a piece of the process. And that's one of the things that somebody asked me the other day, what is the book of American history that you would recommend?
Ooh.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said. I was like, oh, that's so hard, because I could give you an idea that would give you a good overview, but then you would have to read 20 more books.
Yes.
Because none of those overview books can get into that multiplicity of experiences that we've all had as Americans. And so, and it's really the only way to say that you understand American history is that you understand that everything has multiple ripple effects. And
right. I think maybe so it sounds like too, that part of what you're saying is that it's about the method, right? It's not just the one text. It's the, here is an overview with the understanding of a whole bunch of other stories and voices. And it's the method that we need to be pushing more than the one text.
Right. That's what I love about HistoryLink, is that it's a matrix. You know, I've just, over the years, I've really come to appreciate that, you know, we certainly have room to grow in what we have included on the site, but I love the, that you can go through time or through topic and get a lot of different perspectives, and that there's no reason to say, well, we're out of pages. We can't stop. We can't keep telling these stories. We can always keep telling these stories and bringing them in.
Yeah.
So, okay. And so the third set of images, let's go on to that.
Oh, yes. Okay. All right. I'll just go. We don't have as much time. I know I like to talk way too much. It's an occupational hazard because I was
Good. We can go 5-6 more minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
Well,
perfect.
we'll just so very quickly. I just want to talk very briefly about my second book, which is coming out in February 2021. It is called "We Hereby Refuse: Japanese American Resistance to Wartime Incarceration." I am co-writing it with Frank Abe and with illustrators Ross Ishikawa and Matt Sasaki. So the top right image there is me, then Matt, then Frank, and Ross. All of us live in the Seattle, Tacoma, Linwood area, have been working really, virtually for now, but it is a true collaboration because the artists have to do so much. Frank and I have gone through multiple iterations of the script, are finishing it as we speak. And the image on the bottom there, on the bottom right, is Tule Lake, where my dad and his family were incarcerated during World War II. And where my grandfather was actually the first Issei, first generation, to be arrested for basically making trouble at Tule Lake during the war. We Hereby Refuse is about three different characters, three main focus characters. The first one is from Seattle, named Jim Akutsu. He resisted the draft from Minidoka, and he tried to volunteer for the National Guard, but was turned down. When the government tried to draft the young men from camp, Akutsu resisted, and he argued that he wasn't obligated to serve in the military because he was classified as an enemy alien. Akutsu, for anybody who's a teacher, librarian, was actually the inspiration for John Okada's No No Boy, and he's actually pictured in the left-hand image there. The second main character, understanding these are people, the second main character is Mitsuye Endo, who's from Sacramento. She was a public employee who contested her firing just for being Japanese as part of a class action lawsuit against the state of California. And she agreed to be named as the plaintiff in a lawsuit against the incarceration of Japanese Americans. And her case went all the way to the Supreme Court. People have already heard probably of the other Supreme Court cases that challenged the curfew and the eviction. These are the cases of Minoru Yasui and Fred Korematsu and Gordon Hirabayashi, also from the Seattle area. Out of those 4 Supreme Court cases, Endo was the only one who prevailed, and unanimously. And her victory actually led to the closure of the camps for everybody. Our third main character, Hiroshi Kashiwagi, refused to answer the loyalty questionnaire and renounced his US citizenship. He was called a no-no boy, and the government segregated his family at Tule Lake, where my family was. He was later ostracized from the Japanese American community for decades, and he happens to be my uncle. The book also reframes a whole narrative story about rebellion and renunciation at Tule Lake, which is why I have it here, to talk about it not as a narrative of disloyalty or draft dodgers or troublemakers, and put it in the context of things about pride and fear and keeping families together. So all of those 3 characters together we weave those stories together and try to raise important conversations about what it is to be loyal, what it is to resist, and what it is to refuse. So I
It's
think we
amazing.
put in the chat, we put in the chat there, I think, a link
Yep.
to pre-ordering for Elliott Bay. We have lots of events scheduled for the spring when the book comes out, including a book launch with The Wing and a conversation with, I believe, Densho and some other folks. So be on the lookout. We're definitely excited to bring the story to you.
I just thought of about 20 questions, so I will just stick to my one. But I'll say, just in case people aren't aware, it's densho.org. It's an amazing website of oral histories about the incarceration. And so go visit. It's very, very intriguing, and you just get sucked into the stories and all these amazing interviews that they have. And they have the encyclopedia of the history of the incarceration and all the way through the redress. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And so let's see, I will ask you one of our questions and then we'll open up to everybody else's questions. Yes. When you write a story like the graphic novel, who are you writing to when you write that story?
Yeah, such a great question, right? Writers always think, well, I'm writing for everybody, right? But honestly, I start with the people that I'm writing about, right? And the communities that I'm writing about, the subjects of the stories, whether they're with us or not. That's my base, that's my starting point. And if my audience gets wider than that, that's great. And people can go and learn more about things, that's wonderful. But I start with the people that I want to serve the stories and I want to serve the communities. The other answer I have really is my kids and their generation. I'm writing for their sense of the future and their sense of history.
Right. Yeah, they're a whole nother generation removed from so many things. Yeah. And having a completely different experience. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. So, okay, so let us switch to some questions from the audience. And the first one's from Janice. Oh, sorry, I thought I heard somebody trying to get my attention. How do you get people interested and energized to preserve for historical values, such as the stairs to homes no longer existing in the only two buildings in Japantown, Tacoma?
Yeah, it really is finding that human connection, right? And that human story, right? Were I now to embark on a preservation project for those stairs, right? I would go and find who lived there, right? Or what was there. And it was probably a business, probably family, probably a hotel or a shop. And I would dig as far as I could, right, to find the descendants of those folks, to find pictures of what was there, and for people to see the long depth of that story and the texture.
Right. Yeah. Put a face on the story.
Yeah. Put a face on the story.
Yeah.
I mean, Michael taught me a lot about place, but I will always come back to the people, right?
Right. Yeah, he's much more focused on structural. Michael Sullivan is more focused on structural history and the work that he's done for his professional life. I think in his personal work, he's done lots of stories of people. But
yeah.
when he's talking about place, that's one perspective. But the story of the people is what brings it alive for the general public, I think, in particular.
Yeah, I mean, the Tenement Museum in New York is really good at that too, right? That they're all about the people that lived in that place.
I know.
When you can, you should go. It's so incredible.
I would love to see that. So Janice followed up with, following up by saying, how do you even make people aware of the importance? Sorry, I should have read that when I did it, but that's sort of a different question, is how do you get the word out? You guys do the walking tours?
Yeah, the walking tours have been incredible, honestly. Partly because I think there is an embodied learning that happens when you do a walking tour. You really get to feel and stand and walk in the same place. So that's one very powerful way. My husband and I actually created an app with Michael about Tacoma's Japantown which is a self-guided one. So you can actually go to these different stops and read about the stories and the people connected with a different place.
And is that in the App Store?
It is, yeah, and it's for iPhone and Android.
Okay.
But yeah, the walking tours have been amazing. I I would not have expected that at all. But the first time we did it, we had like 90 people show up. Second time we did it, we had 250 people show up. There's something people are really hungry, I think, for that kind of place-based learning.
I think so. So the next question is from Mary K. McCullough, and she says, what resources would you recommend for starting oral history work if you're just kind of thinking about doing that?
Yeah. So there are some guidelines online, lots of guidelines, sets of guidelines online, honestly. And it depends on who you are interviewing, right? If it's a family member, there's a kind of preparation to do. If it's a historical person, like Senator Franklin is, I did a ton of preparation to do it. You kind of have to have a really good knowledge of a broad outline of their life, some of the major things that they might be wanting to talk about, so that you can lead them there and guide them there. But you also have to be prepared for the really interesting detour that,
right.
that they might take. Lots of great places. I think Denshaw even has some things on conducting oral histories with folks. So it really depends on the type of oral history that you're doing, but preparation is really, really key. I can't underestimate that. You can't just kind of say, so tell me about this year or tell me about your life here, because there's a lot more that you have to be able to guide them towards.
The Smithsonian has a good booklet doing family history. It's just available online. And it may even be free now. You know, they may have made something out of it. And my question just went out of my head. Let me think really quick, because I was going to follow up on that. I was going to ask you, the UW Archives is doing a project where they are gathering materials and working with community groups that maybe are not traditionally represented in archives. And I
think I just saw a comment on it actually from
I think
Stephanie about at the Heritage Council.
Goodness, right there. We're thinking
Am I right?
Same, Stephanie.
Yes. Yay, thank you, Stephanie. Yes, absolutely. Yes, they do We Are History Keepers workshops about once or twice a year, I think. And they have really great workshops on preserving family archives. I think there are workshops on doing oral history there as well. But yeah, if you want to do an oral history, there are lots of resources out there for you.
And it never hurts. I did a project with some students at Charles Wright School last fall, and they were doing some oral histories about significant events. And, they're just new to the practice of doing these gathering stories kind of idea. But the thing that was great about it was that you could tell, even in it was a very narrowly focused project because they had to keep on the school schedule. You could tell that they'd made connection with the people that they talked to in a way they wouldn't have made it otherwise. And that's what I love about it, is that you probably can't tell from this interaction, but I'm not someone who naturally asks people personal questions. But I never regret it when I do, because I love hearing people's stories. And so if you do it in sort of a sit down sort of way, it's not going to backfire on you. You might just not get as much as you'd hope if you don't have that sort of preparation and guidance. But especially during this time, I think that that's something you can take advantage of Zoom and the recording capabilities to gather with your elders and get some stories recorded. Everybody thinks that they don't maybe have that important story to tell, but I have yet to hear somebody talk about their life and not be just absolutely enthralled by it.
Yeah, and oral histories, I didn't quite realize, because I hadn't done them in quite a long time, and I'd only done one as part of a college project. But to do Senator Franklin's oral history, it really made me realize that oral histories are mutual gifts, really, right? You kind of think, I'm going to write this person's story down for them. But, I was getting as much, if not more, right? Yes. Out of the process. It was a really amazing experience.
It sticks with you.
Yeah.
It's just, I love doing them. So, okay, well, that is all of the questions that I had on the Q&A. And Nicole, I think, is looking in the chat. So I'm just looking to see. So maybe we have just a couple more minutes. Nicole or, oh, I see one new message coming in. Those are all the questions. Okay. And so Rachel and Nicole, tell me if I need to stop, but I think we have a few more minutes because I wanted to ask Tamiko, what did you think of the graphic novel format for the
Oh
We
my
Hereby
gosh.
Refuse?
It's ambitious. And we had originally been hired, and we were hired as a team. I take that back. We were hired separately to work together as a team. And so there were those kinds of challenges, but the graphic novel format is one that's definitely a challenge for me as a writer because I work in text, right? I work in words. I don't work in images in the same way. Frank has background, of course, in documentary, his documentary Conscience and the Constitution, and his background in journalism and communications gives him a whole other background, right, to write this. And then Matt and Ross, the illustrators, right, have very different styles of visual storytelling. But my hope for it as a format is that it will cross a lot of different audiences, right, who might not pick up a history book per se, right, who might not, have watched, maybe a short video or whatever. I think there's a kind of intimacy about the graphic novel that I hope will really come across when folks read it. There's that visual and, the images and the text working together to try and immerse you more deeply in the experience. Definitely something that I have learned a lot about as well.
So did you read any books to see, to just kind of immerse yourself in?
Yeah, I mean, I've read lots of graphic novels.
You have already,
right?
okay.
I have, yeah, I've read lots, but to study them about and how to write them, especially given that it was a collaborative project, was a different challenge that I hadn't quite expected, right? I mean, I could say, I really love the style of T. Boy's graphic memoir, The Best We Could Do, which is amazing and beautiful, right? But would that translate necessarily, right, to a story about camp? It's a harder translation for sure.
It gives you, or at least it gives me more of an appreciation for the decision making that goes into a graphic novel. When you think about all the choices that are made to work with the topic. And there's other graphic novels in this series, is that correct?
Yes, so the first one Matt actually illustrated, and it's called Fighting for America, and it's about America's New Say soldiers. And then the next book to come in the series after us is about allies who helped Japanese Americans during World War II.
They all sound
so yeah, we're the middle child of the series.
Yeah, Teresa Wu Murray has talked to me about possibly writing a graphic novel because she's an artist, but she's done tremendous research on her greats there's multiple greats, grandfather, Chun Ching Hock, who was the first Chinese business owner in Seattle. Well, the first one that stayed, and who had just this tremendous life. Like his life is just amazing. And I think that story would be particularly well suited to that
graphic novel.
So I'm very excited about all of these books that are in the world, and I can't wait to see yours. So I think that's probably good. And thank you so much. I just really enjoyed talking with you. It's so nice.
Oh, you too. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah. So
and really, thank you for your support and me learning pretty much as I went doing this.
You're a natural.
Very much on the ground, in the boots, kind of kind of job, but I really appreciate your support and mentorship as I've gone through this journey.
Yeah, it's been lucky for me. So, and thank you, Rachel and Nicole, so much for having us on here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you. I just want to echo all the thanks, both to you, Tamiko, and to you, Jennifer. I know I have learned so much, and I am really looking forward to checking out some of your books and for the graphic novel.
Thank you.
I agree. It's really neat to get to try different ways of learning history, and that sounds like such an exciting project. So thank you for sharing these projects and your processes and ways of weaving stories and learning. So really appreciate having you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to our audience out there. Even though we can't see you, we really appreciate all the questions you ask and for coming out here. As a reminder, we will be taking December off from History Cafe, but we will be back in January, so please join us January 20th. I know it is Inauguration Day, but you'll need something to do that evening, so come learn about the history of hip hop in Seattle with Dr. Dade Abe. We're looking forward to that. And if you just can't wait until January, don't worry, there are more MOHAI programs. So come join us for a workshop coming up on December 2nd. We're going to be crafting stories for change, working on how to use personal narratives to advocate for different things you believe in. And we'll have a guest, Esther Little Dove John, to teach us how to do that along with fabulous MOHAI staff. So thank you. And if you learned something new or enjoy the work we're doing, we really would love your support in this unprecedented time. So consider making a gift or becoming a member as we work through this unforeseen closure. And most of all, please stay safe, stay healthy, stay home. Join us here on these virtual webinars and check out some of these great books. You know, you'll have something to keep you going through these dark days. And we wish you your best and hope to see you online soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
You.
You too. Bye.